This is the podcast that we ask our guests from in front and behind the camera, how did they get their foot in the door? What was the key to unlocking their success? What's their story?
Glad you made
it! Our guest today has over 230 IMDB credits. You may know him from Rambo II, Wyatt Earp, and depending on when you were born, either The Karate Kid or Netflix's Cobra Kai as the villainous John Kreese. We chat about working with Tarantino, starting out with Stallone, and why tenacity is the most important thing. Our guest today is actor Martin Kove.
You know, the standard question is, how for you did this all begin? How did you get into acting and martial arts and all the things that you're known for? How did it all begin for you?
Well, I mean, honestly, I decided to be an actor in the 4th grade, and it comes up, occasionally because these two people came to me and wanted to do a book on me. And my first reaction was, why would you want to do a book? I'm not worthy of a book. Anthony Hopkins is, Sean Connery, Peter O'Toole, Marlon Brando. Why would you come to me? And they said, because you started in the 4th grade and you've been tenacious for 50 years. And it's not about Karate Kid or Cobra Kai. It's about you being a tenacious actor coming from, nothing, in the sense my father was a retailer, and my mother was a bookkeeper coming out of Brooklyn. And it was nothing like my son, who is acting a lot and, has a lot of background because I help him out and talk about the ethics of theater and the ethics of movie making and the ethics of Hollywood, so he's got a hook into it. So to be perfectly honest, I started in the 4th grade and did a lot of plays and had a really good time and realized I wanted to do that for my life. And I initially thought that there was a profession called time traveling. I really did. And bottom line was, I was advised I think by the age of 10 or 12, that there wasn't a profession like that. And I said to myself, well, then that means all those people I see in the movies, they're acting, but they're time traveling, going into one space after another. So that just concluded it and locked it in, and I wanted to be an actor. And, I was always fascinated by theater and working in theater in Lincoln Center and La Mama and lots of stuff in New York. It was always fulfilling for me.
Wow, from a really young age then, and it's amazing to look at your credit list. You have more credits, I think, than any other actor I've had on here. Like, you have over 230 credits on IMDb, and I know IMDb is not that, it's not necessarily that accurate, but there's probably more that aren't on there as well. Does it seem crazy to you, looking back from the 4th grade and now looking at your career, how far you've come from that point?
The value of this book and these writers talking to me, one writer specifically, and he unearths information about things like, when I stood in for Sean Connery on a movie called The Anderson Tapes in the 2nd year I was in the business. And it was, Anderson Tapes was Christopher Walken, Sidney Lumet directed, and, Martin Balsam was in it, Diane Cannon. And I was in the business all 2 years, He brings up these experiences that I had that you just don't think about much anymore, because all we as artists think about is the future projects. How can we embellish what we're doing right now? How can I make John Kreese more vulnerable when they're writing him so tough? All the questions. I modeled John Kreese this season to keep me fresh after John Wayne's performance as Ethan Edwards in The Searchers. I just said, this season, these 15 episodes will be like Ethan Edwards, as John Ford directed him in that movie, and it worked for me, it really did. And I guess to answer your question, these accomplishments, you don't think about them. You really just don't. I was watching TV the other day, and I was watching the Olympics, and I went on the wrong frequency, and I went to HDMI 2 instead of 1, and there was a list. I couldn't believe it. And I thought, someone's doing research on me. And there was a list of almost every movie I remember doing, some dreadful, some for a paycheck, some celebrated. I'm looking at this and I'm clicking my clicker, moving it all to the left, one after another. And, it was 25 movies. Some of them I did because it allowed me to use a foil and do like Jean Lafitte, And I remember only taking this movie because, it allowed me to be an ancient and relative of Jean Lafitte. And I got into this sword fight. I mean, I would take movies for some of the most ridiculous reasons, because I love the character, but the script wasn't good. I don't advise any young actor doing that. I always tell them on Cobra Kai, even if you love the part, the script's no good, take a hike, because you can't fix a script by a good performance. It's virtually impossible. And I I don't look back a lot, and I should, because there's, I think, I don't know, you kind of, people throw around this word icon and legend, and I'm not an icon or a legend. Anthony Hopkins is, Marlon Brando is. And I said to Billy one day, William Zabka, I said, why do people throw that word around for you and I? We're not icons. Icons are Marlon Brando, and Steve McQueen and all those people. And he says, for this generation, we're icons. Mm-hmm. We're legends, because they lock into Karate Kid and they lock into Cobra Kai. Mm-hmm. So it was justification, and I let it sit. But there's a lot more things to do with my career to become an icon, as far as I'm concerned,
Well, may I say, for me, I am of that generation where, Cobra Kai, that was a lovely return to the character. But for me, the original Karate Kid, I was born in the 80s, and that was like, it's one of the most iconic movies ever made. And that character of Kreese he is iconic, and legendary. Does that, when you were shooting it originally, the first one, did you have any inkling of what it would become?
No. It seemed to me, I was doing Cagney and Lacey at the time, and I had a few months off. And to me, it was just another heavy. And on the set, we never even liked the title. It sounded like a Bruce Lee movie, And we just went through it, and it was fascinating because you're working with John Avildsen, who just did Rocky, and Joe. And, it was a terrific visionary, and kept us all separate, kept the Cobra Kai separate from me. I was alone. Miyagi and Ralph were together, and it just seemed like, another movie. It didn't seem, it was a one-dimensional, colorless, tough guy, and yet everybody loved to hate him. Everybody loved this guy. I have no idea why. I don't know. I have no idea where the venom comes up in me, where that he presented. I mean, there was some tough stuff that came up for the character, and everybody, over the years, I was so frightened of you. You scared me to death as a kid. On these autograph shows, I listened to it, and I don't know. I don't really think of John Kreese as a villain. I think of him as misunderstood, and I never thought of him as just a villain, even in Karate Kid 1. And he was one-dimensional in Karate Kid 1. He didn't have a lot of a little maniacalness here, and but tough. He was one-dimensional. Later on, I insisted with the writers. I said, listen, if you wanted to do the series, I'm not interested in doing one-dimensional John Kreese like I did in the movies. And so back in whatever it was, 2017, 2018, we made an agreement to write in vulnerability and justification for why he is the way he is.
Mm.
And it was good. They did it in the flashbacks and all that, and my son got a chance to be in that flashback in that episode. And it was good. And more of that is happening in these next 15 episodes. I can't really tell you, but the character reaches an arc that is brilliant.
Mm.
And, it was always interesting for me, the tastes of the UK, because I remember in Cagney and Lacey and Dallas was the two greatest imports coming out of the States. And they were so diabolically different. It was like watching Karate Kid and interpreting it as myself as just another heavy, and he turns into the gift that keeps giving 40 years later.
Yeah, yeah.
But Lacey was so ahead of its time that the UK realized that. Nobody was ready for 1982, two women to be female detectives. My character was a monster, was a chauvinist, and I always believed that a woman could do everything a man can do. I'd always believed that because my mother was a lot more dominant than my father. And I'd always believed that. But the character couldn't. The character was a chauvinist. Women shouldn't be on the detective force. It should be at home. Today, that show would be a massive success. Mm. And at the same time, UK audiences loved Dallas, which was to me a soap opera of talking heads.
Mm.
It's quite interesting.
It is crazy how different places and different countries and everything else, certain things hit, certain things don't. And you've done a lot of films and series and projects that I'm guessing have, Karate Kid's the one that people know, but then there's so many other iconic roles that you've played. And I, doing my homework on this one, I was reminded of some of those earlier roles and like Rambo 2. And not only that, you worked with Stallone before that. Before Stallone was even sort of a household name in Death Race 2000. That experience of, working with someone, did he change at all from the first time you worked with him to, once he'd become Rambo? What was that kind of dynamic like?
Well, we had the same German clockmaker, Kuno Spoonholz, who was our manager in the early 70s in New York. And we became friends, and we came out to California about the same time. And the first movie we did together was Capone. It was a movie starring Ben Gazzara and Susan Blanchard, gangster movie. And, I play a character, Pete Gusenberg, who dies in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And he plays Frank Nitti, the right-hand man to Al Capone. And, we left, and that was like December of 74. And then 75 February, I'll never forget, we're doing Death Race 2000. And I tell this story. I went to the motorhome, and he's sitting there with a red script. And I said, Sly, I said, what do you got? And he said, I'm trying to get this boxing movie made. Very casual, And I said, oh, okay. And a year and a half later, I remember I was doing a TV series, and I couldn't get out to go his screenings. And he had 2 screenings he invited me to of Rocky, and I couldn't go. And we didn't talk probably till Rambo. So that would have been 1976, I think, 76, 77. And we didn't talk until the day I was on the set of Rambo, which would have been some late 84, So, I guess, when it's very sensitive, I want you to see this movie and you can't make it. But he's always, pretty much the same. He's very funny, very creative. I remember, going and working out in the gym with he and Carl Weathers, and for when they were doing Rocky II, I keep thinking casting. And this is right after Rambo. And he was always very creative, still extremely creative, a very funny guy. He's a lot of fun. One-on-one, he's a lot of fun.
I was looking through the literal hundreds of credits, and you must have met and worked with. I mean, I can't even compute the numbers of people that you've worked with in the crews and the cast and everything else. Looking through even just the TV shows that you've done, and some of the most iconic shows that have, been on TV. I mean, whether it be one episode or a bunch of episodes, but things like Charlie's Angels, you had Starsky and Hutch, Murder She Wrote, all the like kind of every show that I remember watching as a kid. Do you have a particular experience on one of those kind of flagship shows that sticks out and have a story that you can chat about?
On Charlie's Angels, the character kidnaps Sammy Davis Jr. So I kidnapped Sammy Davis Jr. So I go into his trailer. This is 1977. And I go into his trailer, and he has a double rigged holster, black leather. And I'm really into the West, and I'm cultivating a couple of Westerns now. And so he's drawing right in front of the mirror. And I come in there and I chat with him a little. He's fast. He's fast like lightning. And I said, wow, I didn't know you were this fast. He says, yeah. And he has his double rig, one-piece double rig. And it was made by a guy named Arvo Ojala. And Arvo Ojala made all the rigs for the, at one time in the 60s, there were 35 Westerns on primetime television. Maverick and Sugarfoot and Bronco and Cheyenne, all these. And this guy, Arvo Ojala, had his name carved out in the back of it with Sammy Davis Jr.'s initials. And he gave it to me. He gave me this double rig, two holsters. And it was, he had a 29 waist. So no matter what I did to this holster, I couldn't wear it and use it, So it's sitting on my saddle for like, it must be sitting on my saddle, just sitting there on the horn for 25 years. And I said to myself, when I did Once Upon a Time in Hollywood with Tarantino, I said, if I have a good time on this a couple of years ago, if I have a good time on this show, I'm going to give this to Quentin because he'll appreciate it. With Sammy Davis's, he'll know Arvo Ojala, and he certainly knows Sammy Davis Jr. Sure enough, I had a great time. I gave it to Quentin. He loved it. He just loved it. And on the premiere, he comes up to me and he says, Marty, did you see it? Did you see it? And I said, what? He said, did you see the holster? Did you see where I put it? And I said, oh, yeah. And he put it behind Al Pacino in his agent's office, right behind his head on a hook. And
Very good.
I didn't think about it watching the movie, But the funny thing was that he was very proud that he loved it. And then he used it in the movie the next couple of days. And I was just so touched that he was so excited about a gift, as excited as I was when Sammy Davis Jr. gave it to me, and I could never use it. He used it right away in a movie because he's so industrious. He's just, and he loves that kind of, memorabilia.
Now for a quick break. We'll be back to the episode shortly.
Check out the Patreon at patreon.com/lifeandfilm. And don't forget to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you enjoy this episode, please leave us a positive rating. Add us on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok at Life and Film Pod. Essentially, please like and subscribe everything. It makes a huge difference. Thank you.
This podcast is sponsored by Betterhelp. Do you work in the film industry? Are you freelance? Or perhaps you have a 9-to-5? No matter what you do, mental health affects us all. I struggled early on in my career with the uncertainty of if and when I would ever work again, struggling to pay my bills or simply with anxiety. Don't know about you, but being an actor, it's very important for me to maintain structure in the downtimes, and I found not only exercise, but talking to someone for me was a game changer. And so Life in Film has partnered with Betterhelp to provide you with access to the largest online therapy service in the world. And it can all be done from the comfort of your own home, from a phone, tablet or laptop. No commute, cutting down travel costs, and most importantly, it's affordable. With over 1,000 therapists in the UK, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a wide variety of expertise in mental health. If you need someone to talk to and you're thinking of giving therapy a go, BetterHelp is a great option. And being a listener of the podcast, you get 10% off. That's 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lifeandfilm. That's betterhelp.com/lifeandfilm.
life and film.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to support us, get early access and exclusive content and episodes, click to join our YouTube channel and become a member now.
And back to the show.
And to have had the longevity that you've had in your career, we'd love to talk about, the downtimes. And it's hard. I would find it hard to believe that you've had any downtime because you've worked so consistently. But has there been any times where you've been out of work and it's been a struggle and it's been hard? Because I know I'm an actor myself, and that's the thing, that people listen to this and actors are listening to this and they think, that everyone's continually working, that's successful. But I know that there can be the ups and downs. Did you early in your career, did you struggle with that at all?
Well, certainly. I mean, the first movie I ever did, where Alan Arkin directed me, and it was a movie called Little Murders, and Elliot Gould starring. This is 1970, first speaking role. And we're in Central Park, and he hits me with a camera, and he kills me, and he's a pacifist. And the story that Jules Feiffer wrote is about a pacifist. He can't kill anybody. So we did the scene for 3 days. I had a great time. And the screening happens about a year later. I'm very excited. It was a Columbia movie. My friend sees the screening and says, "You're not in the movie." And I said, "Oh, no." I said, "No, you're not in the movie." And this is my first speaking part. So about a day or two later, I get a letter from Alan Arkin. It says, "Marty, I had to cut your scene because you did a wonderful job. And don't get down on yourself. But he's a pacifist and he couldn't hurt anybody the way he hurt you in the park. But the scene was wonderful." So I felt good. But my first speaking part, unquestionably, it was subliminal that I was depressed. And I was depressed for a couple of weeks because here I thought I was getting a break. And it turned out to be nothing. And I just, I felt those were the days when I was making like $14,000 a year. And I was living with a lovely lady who was very helpful in supporting me. And it was really interesting. I lived down the street from the Guggenheim in Manhattan. And I was living a good life for someone who was making no money. And I would try different things, One time I got my mother I wasn't working, and I got a modeling job. And it was about a tuxedo. And it was the merging of Irish family and a Polish family. And they used my mother as my mother, in the ad, because I showed them a picture. She said, "Oh, it's great. Your father doesn't look Polish, but your mother does." Brought her in. They used my aunt because she looked Irish as part of the Irish faction. And I would do these strange things and modeling jobs. And, I would do some of this to keep in the creative mode because it would come up and down. When you try to get hospitalization or, in a sense, your medical covered, was the key in many different situations where you would take jobs. And I would rationalize the fact that this role was terrific. I could take this movie, but the movie isn't that good. The script isn't that good. Should I be doing this? And I made a lot of mistakes that way. I did a lot of pictures because I thought the role was interesting and I could make the movie better by a good performance. Never happens. If it's not on the page, it's not going to happen, And so I did a lot of those movies, and after being part of the A group and Karate Kid and Karate Kid 1, 2, and 3, and then Rambo and then Wyatt Earp, and all of a sudden I started doing these movies when my children were born, and they weren't the right movies. I shouldn't have done it, but I talked myself into it because one needed to support twins, and one was used to doing good shows, but good shows that were written well, not good shows because the character was rich, And I'd con myself into doing too many movies like that. Too many of those movies I saw on the TV the other day with the title, and I looked at that and I said, "I never saw that movie." That movie. And the next one, I never saw that one either, And there were a dozen of them. And why didn't I see them? because they went right to DVD because they were.
I love that. I love your honesty though. I mean, that's part of the game. You've got to put food on the table, and especially if you've got kids, and it's, you've got to do what's right. And that's the tricky thing though, of being freelance. And yeah, it's tough. It's tough, man. But you've done so many great roles. It kind of it cancels it out in my book.
Oh,
But
thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
you kind of touched on it there a little bit, but do you have advice that you would give to, actors trying to get their foot in the door now?
Well, I'm approached often by young actors, and I often say this. I say the same thing. There's a show called The Offer, and The Offer. Even my assistant, I told to watch it because The Offer is about the making of The Godfather. It's all
Yeah,
about Al Ruddy, and
brilliant.
it's all about the insane obstacles,
Mm,
that he entertained while making this picture. The mob didn't want him to shoot in New York. Paramount wanted Robert Redford instead of Al Pacino. They didn't want Coppola. They wanted some other Italian. There's all kinds of stories, but The Offer depicts it well.
mm,
And when it all happened and they didn't know what they had, and not only did they have a good movie, they had a classic, top 10 movies of all time. So you never really know in our business what is really going to happen. Did we know Karate Kid sounded like a Bruce Lee movie? Did we know it would be a religious experience 40 years later? And the kids would be watching Terry Silver.
mm,
And Terry Silver, he was only around in Karate Kid 3 because I was not available. That whole script was written for me. Karate Kid 3 was my vehicle, and I couldn't do it because I got a TV series. So I had to sort of bow out and be on the periphery of the movie. So they recreated a character to do what I was supposed to do in Karate Kid 3. And his name was Terry Silver. And now, 40 years later, Terry Silver is my nemesis, you
mm,
know?
mm,
But the bottom line is that I would say tenacity is the key. Certainly work and go to class and do what you can do and work as much as you can. And we've got to understand that a lot of it is luck. So luck will work hand in hand, I believe, with tenacity. And that's what I say to young actors, and that book they're doing on me is based on tenacity.
mm.
You don't think about that. I do it because I remember being a photo double for McCloud, the Dennis Weaver show. And I was galloping on the top of a stagecoach down Broadway in New York. And I was a photo double. It's like a glorified extra. And I called the producer, Glenn Larson, who literally produced Battlestar Galactica, Switch, a multitude of Universal movies, TV shows, and called him once a month for 16 months. Just called him up, said, "You got anything for me?" He says, "No, Marty, but when you come out here, I'll give you a job." 16 months went by. I decided I did Streetcar Named Desire in Detroit, and I got enough confidence with good reviews, sent out 110 reviews to casting people in California. And then 3 weeks later, decided to try my luck in LA. And the first person I called was Glenn Larson. And he was the first person to give me a whole week's work on McCloud. I made more money in $1,500, I think, for 3 days. I never made $1,500 for 3 days. And this is back in 1974.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
So tenacity does work. And I actually advocate it more than anything else. Luck will come if you're tenacious, and you got to do the work. I didn't do the work in the early days. I was busy trying to be Steve McQueen. I was trying. First 25 years of my life, of my career, I was trying to do Magnificent Seven, Thomas Crown Affair, A Great Escape. I was trying to do Steve McQueen. I think I don't even remember when I stopped doing Steve McQueen. But I know I did because I use Martin Kove more now than I use Steve McQueen, you know.
I love that. I love that. Tenacity and don't try and be Steve McQueen. I think that's what I'm going to take from it. That's
Yeah. And if they don't hire you, it's their mistake.
Love it. Love it. Um, yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And I think because we have so many actors that listen to this and it really is, it's great as well. You've just been so honest about it. And I think the audience will really take something from that. I know I have as well.
Most embarrassing moments, yeah.
That wonderful scene in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where, he's staring at the mirror, DiCaprio, and we've all been there. All of
Yeah.
screaming at the mirror saying, "What, are you drinking too much? What's the matter with you? Don't you know your lines? You studied them." We've all been there. So that's what's so great about Tarantino. He captures moments that we all can identify with as artists, and even if you're not an artist. Yeah, there was a time, I'll never forget this. It was so embarrassing. 20 takes of me carrying a wastepaper basket in Cagney and Lacey. And I had to say a line from Red River, a John Wayne movie, Red River. And I couldn't get the line out properly. Entrance. And I have to enter the squad room holding this wastepaper basket that I just emptied. And I just kept blowing it. It was a line about a snake or something. And I just kept blowing it. 20 takes. Oh. And Al Waxman, who's a seasoned actor, he played Lieutenant Samuels, and he'd be waiting for me to finish. And I was so embarrassed that I couldn't get the line out. It must have been an hour doing this one goddamn line. Bottom line is that everybody was very forgiving. Everybody's been through it. So, from the biggest stars to the unknowns. And I know because I collect a lot of bloopers. So I collect bloopers, and you see these major players go up. They just go up, and sometimes you go up for an hour, sometimes you go up for 5 minutes, but you forget the line. Somebody's not clicking, or it sounds, for me, if I have a line that sounds like something I'm saying in a scene or two later, I get confused. That's something that is the nemesis for me, is if this line, in other words, how are you, simple example would be, how are you doing today? And then all of a sudden, if there's a line in the future and another scene, 10 minutes later in the movie, and it would be like, well, how is everything for you today?
Yeah.
I just have a problem, I don't know, mentally it makes too much of an association of what you're learning for, next Wednesday or something. But the bottom line is, I've had that experience, and if my memory was a little bit better, there's probably something recent that I've done, on Cobra Kai, where, it's happened on Cobra Kai. And nobody cares that, if you got a neurotic producer who's looking at the watch, he cares. But none of the artists care. Everybody laughs because we've all been there. We've all messed up. And it just comes with the territory,
There is nothing worse though than when you can see everyone looking at you and you're like, I need to just take a breath and figure out where I am, what I'm doing.
The greatest story that I look back on is a decision I made. I had just gotten home to New York to see my parents that evening, and I get a phone call to play opposite Steve McQueen in Tom Horn, play Gentleman Jim Corbett. And they say, you have to be here tomorrow. For the fitting is tomorrow, which meant I had to leave, see my parents for the evening in New York and leave the next morning. I didn't have the heart to tell them. sitting in my room, in my old room, my old bedroom. I didn't have the heart to say, Ma, I got to leave in the morning. Didn't have the heart. And they would have loved me to be in the movie. But I was too sensitive and I didn't feel like it. So I passed on it. Biggest mistake I ever made. I would have had a week's work with my idol, you know? And later on, I told that to Chad McQueen on Karate Kid, who plays Dutch in Karate Kid 1. And he laughed, cracked up hysterical because he has, he knows how many people idolize his father.
Yeah.
And it was probably the biggest mistake I ever made. And I remember saying on the phone those two words, I'm sorry, I got to turn this down. I think that hurt me more to say than blowing my line in Cagney and Lacey or any lines in Karate Kid. But it comes with the territory, you know.
And you never know, you know, that shaped your career and where you went, the trajectory of where you went. It may have changed everything. And, you know, you've had you know, so far it's been an incredible career. So really, you can't regret that, man. You can't, because everything else laid out after that. But this has been a real pleasure. Thank you, Martin, and all the best with. I mean, the show is obviously going to do incredibly well, and I'm up to date on it now, and I've watched the whole thing since the beginning, and I'm loving it. So I'm looking forward to seeing where Kreese goes towards the end of the season in November and January. And yeah, all the best, man, and thank you so much for taking the time.
My pleasure. Take care of yourself.
Will do. Thanks, mate. Cheers.
Well, cheers.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to support us, get early access and exclusive content and episodes, click to join our YouTube channel and become a member now. Thank you to Martin, and thank you to his team at R&CPMK. As always, thank you to our sponsor, Betterhelp.